The Honest Money podcast is powered by 10x Investments, a licensed financial services provider. Consult with your financial advisor and let's 10x your future together.
Welcome to another episode of Honest Money. I'm Warren.
And this is Pieter Villers from Money Marks.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're finishing off our series on estate planning, and I'm not being clever. Pieter had to remind me before we started the recording. And it's I'm right. It's estate planning.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank goodness. You looked at me like I was mad again.
It's the last one, we promise.
Yeah, he's made a mistake again, old Warren. So we've covered quite a bit around, starting with, it sounds terrible, but how you die and how expensive it is, and then what you should do to make sure that the planning is correct around that, and how do you look after the next generations, etc. But now we're kind of going back to the beginning, which is you're at the start of your adulting life, and you're considering getting married. And Pieter, I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's what you said off air. Is you probably need to think you do need to think very seriously about possibly the second most important contract that you'll ever sign in your life, which is a marriage contract.
Yes. So after a will, that is the most important one. We would consider a marriage contract to be the second most. And it's one of those weird things in life that when you sign a marriage contract, you probably don't have an idea of what that really means. Like you probably now in that honeymoon season where, it's all roses and doves, and getting married and exciting, and you're planning a wedding and there's a lot of stuff going on. It's all over the place. And now you think, oh yes, I should probably, put some sort of contract together, or worse, like don't do it at all. But what you need to understand is that has a massive impact on the way that your financial planning future would play out, both when you are alive, also when you might get divorced. Now, we're not getting married with the plan to get divorced, but the reality in South Africa is that I think about two out of three marriages end up in divorce in South Africa, last time I checked. So those are quite dire statistics. So just have to be conscious of that fact. But also if you pass away, there are some implications on the way that you have been married and how wealth will be distributed, especially if you have kids and how that could play out for them. Now, if you're already married and you have a contract in place, that's already set in stone, but it's good to understand the way that your contract is set up and how that will affect your financial planning. And if you're not married yet or you're getting married, this is probably one of the most important videos that you'll watch, because you need to make a very informed decision before you sign any contract.
Yeah, and I think just understanding that some of the life decisions that you're going to make are impacted now. For example, if you're choosing to have children, it's an important thing to discuss before you have a marriage contract, because inevitably, if it's a husband and a wife, for example, who stays home? Is someone staying home to look after the children? Okay. If that's the case, whoever that person is, statistically, their careers are going to take a backseat. Their earning ability will be permanently compromised. Yeah. This is not an anti-man deal, but that's the reality. My experience in the last nearly 30 years is watching career men and women. When inevitably that's how the gender roles have played out in South Africa, is that when women have taken a back seat to look after children, even if they're working half day or they might trying to work full time, when someone gets a phone call to say, your child is sick, please come and fetch them, inevitably it's been the woman. And that it does. I can see it in their earnings, they earn less. So at divorce, if that's what happens, should the assets be split 50-50? My view, and I think it's controversial, but my view is actually no. The spouse who is takes the responsibility for the children should get a greater share, because their earning ability for the rest of their careers is going to be compromised. So I know when I'm sitting around a table with two young people getting married for the first, second, or third time, and I have this conversation, I can see the man like staring at me with daggers, and the woman going, "Well, that's fair." So now, to prevent the fights, just play this episode, and then you can give me the blame.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's part of the adulting. I wish there was like the adult 101 guide to managing money, because this should be part of that process. And yes, I absolutely agree with you. Oftentimes, when you get married, you are a team. Let's start there. You are a team. You're raising a family together. But the reality is, most of the time, one of you will have to take a step back to take care of the kids, or maybe work part-time or take a break. And as we know, the longer we work, the more experience we gain, the more valuable we become to society, the more we can earn. If someone takes a couple of years out of that pathway, they will probably have a lower earning ability long term. So they almost sacrificing, I think that's the word you use, I like that, a part of their career to take care of the kids, and that should be fairly compensated for. I absolutely agree with that sentiment. So
don't play this to your wife. Don't play this episode to your wife.
I think she's carrying me at this stage. And that's also true. I mean, the gender roles have also become more equal, I think, over time. It used to be that, the husband provided and wife stayed at home. I think these days it's much more equal, and sometimes reversed even. Maybe the wife takes the lead and the husband takes a step back.
So can we just say, so that's exactly the point. It's have the conversation now, and then who is going to do that? And as you say, it might well then be a husband. That's fine, but then the split should be reversed in that favor as well.
Yeah.
So we don't want to lock people into a particular role. We just want to say have the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. It's not about nothing about genders. It's about the career progressions and who is most suited for which role as a team. Always about a team. And so, sometimes it's one, maybe you don't have kids, but the one partner would be more in the line of being an employee, climbing a corporate ladder, and the other one would be an entrepreneur and starting stuff and failing and starting and failing and hopefully at the end succeeding. So those are also different roles that will influence the way that you decide to enter into this contract. Getting married is a lifelong commitment, or at least until it ends, the marriage itself, which is either through divorce or death. Now, so there are 3 main marriage contracts that we'll cover, and then there's like miscellaneous contracts that kind of fits into these 3 categories depending on how it's structured. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail today. We're going to give a high level so that you can understand what types of contracts there are, when it would make sense for who, and what the financial planning implications is. So I think let's start with the easiest one. This is when you are married outside of community without accrual. So what does that mean? Is if you and your partner, before you enter into a marriage, you own assets. So if you are young in your 20s, you probably don't own anything. You're probably starting at 0, which is fine. That's where we all start. But let's say you are older. Let's say you are late on in life, you've built up assets, you've got investments, you've got properties and all of that. Maybe you were married before your partner passed away, or maybe you got divorced and you're marrying again. Now you're late on in life, you've got your own assets that you've built up. So your partner has their assets. And then if you enter into this specific contract, the assets that you own before marriage, you keep for yourself. And then when you get married, the assets that you build up together, you also keep separately. So you're going into the contract separately. You're going out of the contract separately. What's mine, is what's yours is yours. That's essentially what it means. So what you build up is in your estate, and what your spouse builds up is in theirs.
So without community, so outside of community of property, without accrual.
Without accrual, yes. Yeah.
Okay. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours, and that's it.
Yes.
So it's a very important conversation to have, because, for example, if you then decide to go into the marriage and you get married, and then you say, let's buy the family house. Now you need to decide how that's going to be bought, who owns it, how's it going to be paid for, etc. Because either there needs to be a separate agreement just for that house, or one person has to buy it and the other one has to pay rent or something. But these are conversations you have to have before you do this.
Yeah, and I would say, based on what I know about it, for who it might make sense is if you maybe are late on in life and you've built up your own assets, and you kind of at that point in life where you're not going to accumulate much more. You're probably just going to, whatever you've built up, you're going to earn money. So maybe you're in retirement and you're deciding to get married. That can happen. Or maybe you are just, I see sometimes with very wealthy business owners that rather prefer to, when they get remarried, to keep their assets the same, because they don't necessarily want that to be split later on in life. Personal choice.
And also that if you are married later in life and you've got adult children, where you want your children to benefit from your estate.
Yes.
So you don't want to divide that up potentially with your new spouse's children as well. That causes a fight.
Yeah.
So it's a very nice. That's a very good idea actually. I was about to say to you, why on earth would we ever do this? But those are good examples.
Yes, it's probably one of the least popular contracts because you have to very specific. You have to set up the ANC and specify without accrual. That's like you have to include that in the contract when you sign it.
Let's just jump. You chucked in. You have to specify ANC. So this is not a political party.
It's not the African National Congress. It's the anti-nuptial contract. That's what it refers to. So that's the easiest way. So when it comes to financial planning, what it means is you doing everything separately. Your taxes are separately calculated. Your cost when you die is everything that's in your name gets added to your estate, and estate duty and executors fees. All of that is applied. If you pass away, your spouse won't have any claim to your assets, and then you can decide based on your will how that gets distributed, and there's no claim to that.
What about debts?
If debts are in your name within your personal estate and it's without accrual, then creditors won't be able to attach your spouse's debt. So that's also maybe a good idea if you're more in the entrepreneurial route and you, I guess, want to protect your spouse from those claims.
Yeah,
makes sense.
And I guess if you're coming into a marriage and one spouse has got an enormous amount of debt, then you don't want to marry into the debt.
Yeah,
you want to marry the person, not their debt.
Yes.
So that might be another consideration. I'm maybe just going to say that if there are those kinds of issues, for example, where you're having this conversation and one person's has an enormous amount of assets, the other one doesn't, or one's got a lot of debt, or the other one doesn't, etc. It's critical that you're having these conversations, but also that you're getting advice.
Yeah, yes.
Because this show should alert you to those implications, but gee, don't rely on the show as your the beginning, the middle, and the end of what you should be doing. Yeah. You really need to get advice for both of your peace of mind when you're going into this.
Yes, and just to gooi that disclaimer in here, anything that we discuss is not financial, tax, or legal advice. It's just education guidelines to help you understand the principles, but always, again, go seek professional advice. So now let's move to the second one. This is now still, so we call it ANC with accrual, the anti-nuptial contract. So it's outside of community with the accrual. Previous one was without accrual, with accrual. What does that mean? Is when you and your spouse enter into the contract, you've got your own assets, they've got their assets. Now you're still going to keep those assets separately that you brought into the marriage, and it's going to be increased by inflation over time when you one day separate, either by death or divorce. But what you then build up together once you are married, that will then get divided by 2, essentially. So the calculation around that would be, let's say Pieter gets married and then Pieter builds up 10 million rand and the spouse has 0. When Pieter and spouse goes up, they separate ways, then that 10 million would be divided by 2 and the spouse will have that 5 million claim from Pieter. So either it's his estate if I were to pass away or if it's divorce. Very simplified explanation. There's a lot more to that, but that essentially is what it means. So you enter into the contract with your separate estates, but you build up together whilst you are married.
So just to take it through. So I arrive with nothing. My wife arrives with, my wife to be has 10 million rand. We get divorced 30 years later, and our collective is worth 40 million rand. What happens?
Yeah, so the wife, let's say that 30 million that she brought in would be escalated by inflation to that point that you pass away. And then they will kind of retain those assets. But then the difference is a calculation that we do to what you've built up and that what you've brought in. They look at that number and then look at who's got the smallest estate. And then that difference will be divided. And then the person with the smallest estate will have they call it an accrual claim towards that.
So it won't be so they won't take the original 30 million. They'll say it's 30 million plus X number of years of inflation. Yes. And so if your estate is smaller than when you started, tough luck.
Yeah. Yes. Hopefully you'll have more. Hopefully it will be a successful marriage. But that's the principle. And again, most people, when they get married, they probably have 0. They call it the commencement value.
And I do like that from so for me, I mean, I'm not, again, this is about preference and stage of life, etc. But for younger people starting out, this would be my kind of preferred route. Because again, let's going back to the one person takes a bit of a step back in their career, etc. And you've used the entrepreneurial example a lot. If you both start out with zero and one person's more of an entrepreneur than the other, I know it's certainly in my marriage and in my career. My wife was the banker in the beginning. She had the reliable income. I didn't. I had to build out Galileo with my partners. So it took a long time for me to become an equal income generator. Forget about trying to get ahead. And if we had a different marriage contract and then we got divorced, she would have supported me at all that time, and then we get divorced. I take all my money and leave. So I like Accrual for that reason, because it doesn't matter that your contributions financially might have been a bit different over the lifetime. Each of you have put effort in. As you said a few times, you're a team. And the one I know, I can't start Galileo without my wife. I can't function actually day to day without my wife. So why on earth would she not benefit or participate?
Yes, and that's very true. If you are a team, which you should be as a marriage couple, I think the ANC with Accrual does make sense, and that's how I'm also married. Is understanding that when you got together, you might have some assets that you've built up, which is fine, but you're building wealth together as a team, and that does sometimes mean that either one of the spouse or both spouses at some point in their life will have to make some compensation, some take a step back from a career. In my case, also I'm a bit more the entrepreneurial person, so my wife has a stable income that helps to support me to do that. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to go down the entrepreneurial route. So it's supporting each other, and then knowing that if whatever happens one day, if you pass away or you get divorced, it's a fair distribution of what you've built up together. Especially if one spouse is not able to work and the other one is, they still, just because they're not working and contributing financially, they are contributing because they're taking care of the kids. And if they were to work, you would have had to pay someone to do that. So, and they're adding a lot of value to enable the other spouse to work. So I think it's a very fair way of entering into this partnership, into this team effort, and to one day then make sure it's fairly distributed. So the only real difference between this ANC with accrual and ANC without accrual is that when you pass away, you get divorced, the spouse of the smaller estate can have an accrual claim to the estate of the person that passed away, or the estate when they get divorced. And there's like a separate calculation that we do for that to see how much did we both start with, how much do we have together, and then there's some deductions and stuff that we subtract, and then we get to an amount that we can then claim from the other spouse, which I agree, it's probably the fairest one to look at.
Then we get to my least favorite form of marriage agreement, and that's community of property.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yes, so we've talking about outside of community of property with accrual, without accrual. Now we're going inside of community. So what does that mean? It means that when you get married, everything that you own gets added together, everything that you build up is added together, and everything is split 50-50, basically. So it sounds very simple in terms of, but it's easy, we just divide it by two. But there's a lot of legal implications with being married inside of community of property. One of which is you can't necessarily just make decisions on yourself. Usually a lot of times you have to have your spouse's permission. If you buy a car and you need to take out finance for the car, probably going to have to get your spouse's permission. If you want to vary an insurance contract, probably also going to need your spouse's permission. Sometimes that means verbal permission. Sometimes it means written permission. Let's say I want to, give my couch to my neighbor. A verbal permission would be fine. But if it's a legal contract, most likely insurances or debt and stuff like that, you're going to need written permission, which can sometimes complicate things, especially if you feel like, I've added a lot of value to this house. Let's say you build up a house together and you want to have a say on certain things. It's not always going to be like that, because you're going to have equal rights to most of the assets that you've built up together.
And it's the worst option for an entrepreneur, because let's say you launch a business, everything's done together, and for whatever reason the business fails and you owe people money. it's not just you now. So it's not just Warren that owes the people that lent me the money. It's Warren and his wife.
Yeah.
And if it gets to the point where I become insolvent, my wife goes down with me financially. Yes. So the creditors have a claim on her assets in a situation like this. So it's going into the marriage, you kind of think it's the fairest one, where it says what's mine is mine, what's mine is ours, and what's yours is ours. Let's just throw everything together in one pot. Life can happen in a way that you don't foresee, where no one's done anything wrong to each other, but something goes horribly wrong. Yeah. And for me, I think it offers the least protection to individual spouses, but actually to the family as well. Unfortunately, it was the most common way that people got married a long time ago. Yeah. And so we do find people that are maybe in their 50s, 60s and older that are married in community of property. And as you said, the thing is cast in stone once you're married. So you can't undo that unless you legally get divorced. Yeah. And that's another exercise. But it's the one that you should really think about. Just jumping into this because of what you think on the surface is fair, you can accomplish all of the fairness in a different way. Yeah. I'm so uncomfortable when there might be religious reasons, and that's one thing. We're not imposing that on people. So it might be that your culture or your religion says that you need to do that. That's a separate conversation. But I think when you're faced with choices that are simple financial planning decisions, I don't know. Can you think of a good reason why someone should get married in community of property?
I agree with you in terms of maybe in some cultures and some instances. So to start off, if you don't have any contract when you get married, this is your default. So if you haven't put up a ANC with or without the accrual, you married in community of property. So probably if you don't know how you married, that's that's yours. So in terms of, I think from what we mainly speak from today is from financial planning perspective. So if we meet clients that are married in community of property, that does make things more complicated because let's look at your taxes. If you earn an income from an employer, call it remuneration, that will stay yours from a taxation perspective on how that's taxed. But any interest, any dividends, any rental income that you or your spouse earns will be divided by 2 and it will go to your separate taxes. So that might sometimes mean that, let's say, one of the spouses are earning a lot of income and they're in the maximum tax bracket, and the other spouse is maybe managing property, and the rental income you'd think will only be taxed in their name at the lower tax bracket. Doesn't work like that. The rental income will be divided by 2, and half would be added to the one that earns a lot more tax at that higher tax bracket. So that's from a taxation perspective. And a estate planning perspective, if one of you were to pass away, the entire estate gets divided by 2, and then you're going to have to pay estate duty on that portion, that half, and then executor's fee on the entire estate. So the estate costs can also sometimes be quite higher, I think, from the cases that I've seen. So when it would make sense to get married in community of property, I think if there's a specific maybe cultural or religious reason, yes, it probably could make sense, because I think that supersedes any logical financial planning kind of argument that we can be made. If it's something inherent to your beliefs, then for sure, go for that. Just understand the implications of that. I would be cautious though, if I were to get married today to go into that specific route. I'd probably still use the ANC with accrual.
And maybe if that is the situation where your beliefs are going to determine how you get married, then for an entrepreneur, for example, who is married in community of property, be very careful as to what debts you take on board. Make sure that you're not doing things in your own name, that you set up a company, that you have structures. We covered trusts in a previous episode, but this might be the situation where people who don't necessarily have a lot of money might well want to trust. Because at least they can store some of their assets in a trust, and if something goes wrong in financially in their own names, that they've got some assets that are protected.
Yes.
But I can't. I'm going to be a little bit more definitive. I can't think of a good reason for community of property outside of beliefs and the like. So for me, if someone's just kind of forcing you into a situation like that for no good reason, you really need to ask some serious questions.
Yes. And getting married and not having time set up a marriage contract is definitely no excuse, because it's probably going to catch up with you later on in life. You need to seek professional legal counsel, depending on kind of the person that you are and the person you're marrying and where you are in your stage in life and how you see your life playing out. Potentially foreseeing that will depend on which marriage contract you take out. And to kind of just summarize, if there's no marriage contract, you're in community of property. You set up an anti-nuptial contract, you have to specify with or without accrual. If you don't specify, you with accrual. And if you want to be without accrual, you have to add that in there. And then also commencement values when you get married. There are some other types of contracts that kind of falls within these three spheres, but that has different kind of like laws around them. And I think in South Africa, the laws around marriage have evolved over time as well. It used to be that, these are the only three ones that you get, but there's also customary unions where it's you kind of married within a specific cultural environment, which I think a lot of people in South Africa are actually married, where there's more of a customary side to it, that would usually also be in community of property unless you have put up a ANC. There's civil union, that's usually also in community of property unless you specify. And then there's also polygamous type of marriage contracts. That's more so in the Muslim rights that also has its own rules. So there's a lot of work that has been done around marriage contracts to make it more, I guess, fair for the very diverse environment that we find ourselves in South Africa, which I think is a good thing. But it also makes it more complicated because you really need to understand the laws around these contracts. And especially if you have those cultural or religious beliefs that you want to honor, especially seek legal advice of someone that understands those environments, that can give good advice, because not everyone that understands the main three ones would be able to properly guide you maybe on those different types of marriage contracts that we get.
And maybe just two things to add. One is when you're at the stage of drafting these contracts, whatever contracts you're doing, it's a great time to also make sure that the wills that you're going to have, because you're about to get married, so your wills are going to have to change from being a single person to married. Make sure that your wills and your agreements, your marriage agreements, are tying up. They can't be in conflict. That's going to cause a nightmare.
Yes.
And then just lastly, and it might prompt people who are not married but living together, sharing assets, etc. Just understand that there are quite strict laws in South Africa about when you live together for a certain amount of time and you're sharing and financially supporting each other at some point, that you might end up in a form of a kind of a legal marriage that you didn't even know you were in. And so just again, make sure rather document things where you're saying, I'll support you, or we're going to buy a house together, let's have a contract. I mean, it's not to discourage you, just to make sure that you are covering legal basis for both of you.
Yes. And to add to that, a contract is very important, but a court order can always also supersede that. So maybe you are married outside of community without accrual and you separate ways. The spouse could still apply for a court order to still have a claim to your estate. So just adding that to that, but that is a very onerous process that you'd rather want to avoid. And before you get to that point, make sure that you're very transparent in the way that you would want to enter into this partnership, into this team, and that both parties are in agreement, that both are comfortable with the way that assets will be distributed, and that you don't run into problems later on in life when you're married and you, because you didn't understand. I think that's probably the worst situation to be in if you just didn't know or you didn't understand properly. This is now our message to you if you're getting married, to really spend some proper time to have those conversations.
And we hope that you get very good contracts, that you get very good advice, and we hope you never have to use it.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much for listening. This has been our series on estate planning. We hope you enjoyed it. We would love to get your comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. And we forgot to thank Steeland at the start, or I forgot to thank Steeland at the start of the show. Thank you for dressing us and keeping us warm this winter.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much to Steeland for sponsoring. Thank you everyone for tuning in for this series. The next series, we're going to cover a little bit about financial advisors and when to use one, when maybe to DIY, and what you need to actually ask your financial advisor to make sure you get proper advice. So make sure to stay tuned for next week's episode as well.
Bye-bye.
The Stradivarius violin is considered to be the most emotive instrument in the world. That's why you'll often hear it in investment ads, adding drama and the utmost importance to their philosophies, or for the announcement of a fancy new fund manager. 10x investments don't need dramatic instruments to seem impressive. They let the results sing for themselves. So 10x your future without the drama. 10x is a licensed FSP.